for Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020 to order. And in that, it is impractical to hold an in-person Ames City Council meeting due to the Governor of Iowa declaring a public health emergency occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic and the Governor placing limits on the size of public gatherings. This meeting is being held electronically as allowed by Section 21.8 of the Iowa Code. Anyone who desires to provide input on any item may do so as a video participant by going to zoom.us/j/826-593-023. You also can telephone in our toll-free line at 888-475-4499. We're going to go ahead and begin with our consent agenda this evening, Council. The Council desire to pull any items from consent tonight. Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the consent as submitted.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we have Garten moved and Betcher seconded. Roll call, please.
Betcher. Aye. Garten.
Aye.
Junk. Aye. Corriere.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to public forum. There's a time set aside for the public to address City Council on any items that are not on the agenda. And Brian, has anyone indicated an interest to address Council this evening?
Mayor, I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Very good. We will close public forum. We'll move on into administration. Item 31, motion setting salaries for council appointees, which would be the city manager and city attorney. Amber?
Yes, so Bronwyn and I led the efforts to conduct the city manager and city attorney reviews this year. And that information has been sent to council. I think that I speak for everyone when I say we have very strong leadership in both our city manager's office and our city attorney's office, and certainly are appreciative of their services. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive for both individuals. And so what we have recommended to council for your approval tonight is a 3% increase for the city manager. That would equal a $6,600.97 increase over the current salary. And then for the city attorney, we're recommending a 5% increase, which equals a $6,895.85 increase over the current salary.
Thank you. Any discussion, council? Okay. Open up public comment on this item. Is there anyone, Ryan, that wants to address council on this item?
Mayor, I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you. We'll close public input. Entertain a motion approving the recommendation of the review committee.
Move approval.
Betcher?
Second.
Martin seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call, please.
Garten.
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Aye.
Betcher. Aye.
Thank you. And Steve and Mark, I would agree with Amber 100%. You have our full confidence. You're doing a phenomenal job, especially in light of what's going on right now. And I think this is definitely a vote and to affirm that. So thank you for your efforts, and it's a pleasure working with you. And on behalf of the city, thank you for your efforts as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Move on to item 32, resolution approving revised contract with Iowa State University for sustainability advisory services from July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021, and the amount not to exceed $34,000. has that, is any staff going to be addressing that item tonight?
Unless there's any questions, I think it's
Any questions for, okay. We'll open up public input. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to address council on this particular topic?
Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you, Brian. We'll close public input. And council, as you all are aware, we had a very good report from Mary Rankin here not too long ago, and we certainly value his services. So I would entertain a motion on this item.
Move approval.
Second.
So who moved? Was that
Amber.
Amber? And Betcher, is that you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Junk.
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Aye.
Betcher. Aye. Garten.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item 33. Staff report regarding modifications to outdoor dining related to COVID-19.
Brian will start, I think.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. This report came to you as a result of a request from the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber has done some outreach and gathered feedback from businesses about what would be helpful during this COVID-19 pandemic with regard to loosened restrictions related to sidewalk cafes and outdoor dining. And so the feedback that the Chamber gathered included 3 areas: allowing parking spaces to be used for outdoor seating temporarily, using city right-of-way for patio space, and allowing signage to be placed in the right-of-way to advertise the business. 2 of those issues, the second and third, are already provided for in our code to some extent. The use of signage is, however, restricted to the downtown service center and Campustown service center zones. We have a temporary portable outdoor sign provision. The use of parking spaces, staff has evaluated that, and we don't believe that there would be an impact on stormwater requirements or other development standards by placing tables and chairs temporarily in a parking space. There would be an impact on minimum parking requirements potentially. Now this is, again, we're talking about temporary and portable tables and chairs. If somebody wanted to put something more substantial in that area, then that is not exactly what we're talking about. So the council has the option, if it would like to direct staff to temporarily waive the enforcement of the minimum parking requirements so that we can allow tables and chairs to be temporarily placed in the parking stalls. The council could also expand the use of temporary outdoor portable signs on public sidewalks. 2 other issues that staff has put in the report have come to our attention, not from the feedback the chamber gathered, but from our own observations. One is that we do have some issues. One of the issues that seems to be the most difficult to comply with on a regular basis for sidewalk cafes is the fencing requirement. There's a requirement that there be barriers around the entire sidewalk cafe. And we feel that that's important if alcohol is going to be served, because there is a requirement in the law that there's a delineated premises that the license covers, and the barriers help do that. However, if alcohol is not going to be served, we think that as long as the proprietor is able to keep the tables and chairs from creeping into the sidewalk area, the traveled way in the sidewalk, then there doesn't need to be a requirement. The second issue is that sidewalk cafes are limited to the frontage of the adjacent business that they're in front of. And so this has a tendency in some spots to make for very small sidewalk cafes. And so we think there was an opportunity to make it more flexible if the adjacent business grants permission to allow the sidewalk cafe to extend further down into the adjacent business's frontage, so long as it doesn't create a gap and create effectively multiple sidewalk cafes for the same business. Those are two issues that we think, if the council would like to, you could direct us to make a permanent change in the ordinance about those two issues. And you could also direct us to more immediately waive the enforcement of those two provisions. So effectively, you'd be implementing it right now as a part of this package of loosened sidewalk cafe restrictions. That is all that I have for you tonight. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have, and there may be some other folks who are on the meeting who would like to provide some feedback.
Council?
Brian, I have a couple of questions about the sign ordinance. We have the temporary waiver of enforcement of section 22.32B4. If we waive that, that is not waiving the obstruction part of the ordinance, right? That's a separate issue that's covered in obstruction of the right of way or something like that.
Right, you are only waiving that section for the purpose of allowing the signs in other zones. So if all of the other aspects of the temporary portable signs section of the code would still be in effect. It's just taking away the limitation that only allows those to be placed in CSC and DSC.
So they could be placed in Somerset or wherever there happens to be a restaurant that might want to use the outdoor seating option.
Yes, and what I think is important for all of these temporary changes or modifications to signs and sidewalk cafes and so forth, all the temporary components of this would be tied to our current sidewalk cafe season, which ends October 31st. That's how it's prepared in the staff report. So we think that's a nice clean break, that at the end of that sidewalk cafe season, then all the normal rules would apply again for the following season.
Thank you.
Brian, I have a question about the barriers for alcohol service.
Yes.
The staff report made a comment about the state code saying there has to be a delineated premise. And I'm just wondering how that's different. I know in Somerset, there aren't necessarily barriers out for the restaurants that are serving alcohol.
Well, I know that the distinction in Somerset versus the downtown or campus town is that those sidewalk cafes aren't actually on city right of way. They're on the property of the business. I know that when we established the sidewalk cafe code, there was a lot of concern about making sure the alcohol didn't creep out into areas that it wasn't allowed to be in.
Sure.
So I'm not sure I have a good answer as to how there's not to be barriers in Somerset, but there are in other areas. It's perhaps because it's in a sidewalk easement and not in the right of way. It's on private property, not on right of way.
Yeah, and I understand that. I just think that, when you look at the differences, I don't think most people probably recognize that one is, on the restaurant's property and not on city property because it is so close to the shared use path.
Sure.
Other questions or comments from Brian on the staff report?
I don't have a question, but I'd just like to say a word of thanks for bringing this back to us so quickly. It was just the last council meeting when we discussed this, and it got out to the Chamber of Commerce. They did a survey, and staff was able to digest it and bring back some concrete actions for us to consider tonight. I think that's a really spectacular turnaround. So thanks a lot.
I have one other question I had forgotten about, and that is we did receive a couple of emails. I think one was from Dan Culhane referring to the patio license fee and whether or not that could be waived. I didn't have enough information on that to understand exactly what that is and how much that impacts the cost of setting one of these up.
There is a fee for sidewalk cafes. I believe it's $35 per season. We have, my best guess is we have about a dozen sidewalk cafes in a typical year. So the fee is intended to recoup the cost of processing the application and making sure that it's in order and that the site complies with the code. If you were to waive that fee, would it be a major hit to the bottom line of the city clerk's office budget? Probably not. I think you'd have to ask, we're midway through the season, and some establishments have already gotten their sidewalk cafe permits. And so, would you be talking about a waiver for the remaining season for new applicants? Would you be talking about making this retroactive and processing refunds for the existing permittees, or how would you handle that if that's what you intended to do?
And it is the understanding that if a business that does not currently have a sidewalk cafe wants to set one up, at this point, they would have to go through that permitting process and pay that fee. They can't just set up their cafe without following the regular process.
Yes. And in the report, we clarified there's a difference between setting up a sidewalk cafe on the city right-of-way versus setting up tables and chairs in a parking lot. If the council was to waive the parking requirements for the purpose of allowing tables and chairs in a parking lot on private property, that would not require a fee or a permit. It's only when it would take place on the city right-of-way, on sidewalks, or in a parklet, or some such thing, that would require the permit fee.
Okay, I'm going to open up public comment on this particular item. Brian, has anybody indicated an interest to address council on this item?
Yes, Mayor, we've got a couple of hands raised. The first one is Bethany DeVries.
Okay.
Beth, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin your comments.
And then if you would limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, Stephanie, your name and address, and please proceed.
Hi, this is Bethany DeVries. I own Della Viti downtown, right on Main Street. And I'd also like to thank Brian and the staff and the chamber for bringing this back again so quickly. My main question is for the staff report. It talks about having the space contiguous, and while and I'm one of the main people that brought this up in the first place, the salon next door has come to me multiple years and said, please put your tables out there. We'd love for you to have that space in use. And it's contiguous with my doorway because we share a doorway. But there would be a break for people to get into both of our businesses. So there's still a gray area where it's contiguous with my doorway, so it would still be one patio, but people have to be able to get in. So that's my question.
Okay, Bethany, we'll go ahead and have Brian answer that question after we get all the public input. Anything else?
No, I don't think I don't think so. Thank you again for bringing this up so quickly. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for addressing council.
Okay, Mayor, next up is Dan Culhane.
All right.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dan Culhane here with the Ames Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you as well. This got to me, I think, the day after your last council meeting, and so I appreciate this was the council's idea to look at ways to find solutions for our businesses, and I know they were very grateful. our survey went out to a little over 70 restaurants, bars, coffee shops, and things of that nature. And you've seen the feedback that was provided to us that we forwarded on to you. I think the contiguous space question that Beth DeVries has is a really a good one. There seems to be some logic to that, given they share a doorway with the salon. And as I said yesterday in my email that I sent, I said I did not know what the fee was. I didn't realize it was $35. But at the same time, I think all of our businesses, particularly these businesses, they've been highly vulnerable these last few months, and $35 seems somewhat inconsequential, but it's every penny is counting for these folks. And then finally, on the fencing piece, I can appreciate the rule, but that's just one more expense for these businesses, in particular those that would be putting a patio or a cafe on public right of way. And so I appreciate the options that have been displayed tonight. I hope you'll support them, those at a minimum. But if you look at the fees and you look at the fencing, I think that'd be richly appreciated by our business community, especially those engaged in the restaurant industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Anybody else, Brian?
Yeah, hi, this is Marcus, Monkey Duck Pub. So I also want to thank you all for responding so quickly to this. It's very helpful for us. Really, from my perspective, the issue is you're moving parking spaces and the difficulty with that and maintaining those minimums. So I anything that can be done on simplifying that process would be greatly appreciated. Also, kind of a longer term thing, I'm wondering about options for, we have parking's not really a big issue outside of town. Are there other possibilities of working with some of our neighbors, our commercial neighbors, for shared spaces if that does become an issue? That's something that we were wondering about. We're on pretty good terms with some of those people. But and finally, we also have a disconnected area as well. I'm not interested in serving alcohol out there, but it would be an additional area for serving food. So that I'm not sure what the issues are with doing that. That would be also something we'd be very interested in doing. And I'd also like to say real quick, we have, allegedly opened up and everything, but a lot of my customers, especially the older ones, really, they have no great plans to come flooding back in as soon as we open up. So I think we're in this for the long term. So I do appreciate all the thought that's going into helping us out over these next 6 months or so. So thank you for that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Marcus, before you leave, I'll make sure I got this down. You got a question on the parking and also a seating area which was not contiguous with your other seating area where you would serve food. Are those two items that you were?
Yeah. So really, if the additional outside area doesn't require additional parking, then all we really need to do is move some spaces. When I've sort of addressed this in the past, it gets complicated because as soon as you move parking spaces, there seems to be difficulties and running into site plans and things like that. So that's the one my main question, I guess. And second question is, can we utilize an area which is not connected to the building for serving food? I wouldn't want to serve alcohol out there, but certainly it would be an additional area to serve food. And that's the little island there by the castle and stuff under the sign. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, those are all the comments or all the hands raised, I believe.
Okay, we will close public input. And then Brian, can you go through these questions then and answer, first of all, Beth's question regarding the contiguous area was interrupted by the access to her business? I'm not sure if there was a specific reason cited for that requirement at the time the code was adopted. If I had to guess, I would guess that it is to help more closely identify that cafe with that business. So if there was an issue, it would be clear that that sidewalk cafe belongs to that business.
I think my only concern with allowing multiple sidewalk cafes that are broken up into segments with a single business is it does create the opportunity for sidewalk cafes to be stacked, right next to each other, business to business to business, and that could make it more difficult to understand who's responsible for what. This might be an opportunity for us to try this, and then consider whether it would be something to make a permanent modification to. I think this would be a good opportunity for that. But as far as other rationales for why it's set up the way it is in the code, I'm afraid I can't provide any more insight on that.
So under alternate or option 1E, is that what she's talking about in the staff report or in the council action form? Excuse me.
No, there's two pieces. One is the sidewalk cafe code right now requires that the sidewalk cafe be only extend to across the frontage of the building that it's attached to. So it can't extend onto somebody else's frontage. That's the component that is proposed to be waived and permanently modified. The other component is a different component of the code that says that you may only have one sidewalk cafe, one unbroken sidewalk cafe per restaurant. And so if you wanted to be able to have two sidewalk cafe codes, or sidewalk cafes per restaurant with a break in between for the entrance to the building, that would be a different waiver.
So option 1E is actually talking about, for example, if you had a business, if you had a door that entered on the west side of the cafe, then from that doorway to the east, you could have a cafe, and then if the business then is to further to the east, but its door is way to the east, that could continue on because it would be an unbroken area that would not be interrupted by an entry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think where it would become an issue currently, let's say you had a building and you had the door right smack in the middle of the building. Yep. You could only have your sidewalk cafe on the left or the right of the door. You couldn't have it across the whole frontage because you'd have a break there for the door. And so if you were to adopt some kind of a new waiver of that requirement, that would allow two sidewalk cafes to be set up on either side of the door. That's what I believe Bethany was describing. I mean, that's also in conjunction with extending it along the adjacent property, which is also not provided for in the current code.
And then
Brian, sorry, I was just going to ask that the other thing that Marcus mentioned is another location for a cafe on the same property, but it's not contiguous to the building.
So that's a different issue. If that second location is fully contained on the private property, I don't think there's any concern about that under the existing proposal here. I think that would be fine. If it was a true sidewalk cafe and it was going to be on the public sidewalk, that would fall into our sidewalk cafe issues, which don't allow for multiple sidewalk cafes per business right now. But I think his situation, that's fully within his own property. And I don't think that would be a concern under either our existing code or this proposed waiver.
The key is if he's displacing some parking spaces, we're going to just, for council's consideration, is temporarily replacing those missing parking spaces or displaced parking spaces until October 31st of this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the fencing, which goes back to Amber's question regarding if someone who serves alcohol wants to have a bigger, expansive sidewalk cafe, as it stands right now, based on your understanding of the Iowa code, there does have to be a physical barrier between the sidewalk cafe area and where people are walking. Is that correct?
There has to be a delineated premises, and the fencing accomplishes that. And maybe there are other ways to interpret that. And that might be a question for Mark, but I'm not sure that we have the ability to waive that.
When you say delineated, would you, I'm not trying to be silly, but would be painting a stripe on the sidewalk.
Exactly.
Would that be a delineated area where you're actually defining where it is? I'm just trying to understand what the code says.
A line, that's like the definition of delineated, I think, is a line drawn. I think that would do it.
D line?
Yeah, that's what delineated means, right? Is to draw a line.
Is the delineation piece just if it's going into the public right away? I still go back to the Somerset example where you have the restaurants who are serving alcohol setting up outside of their doors. Obviously they're on their property, but I mean, no one knows that. They're so close to the shared use path. It's not, no one can understand the difference between the two.
Mark, can you help us out?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to Amber's question, but in terms of the delineation, I mean, I think if that's what the code says, and I haven't looked at this code section closely, it's that, you know, that can be done by painting a line. But I'd want to look at that before I say that definitive.
Okay.
A physical barrier is a better delineation than a line.
Right.
Well, it also avoids the issue of painting the city right of way. And downtown, you've got decorative pavers on the sidewalks, which I guess we're going to be replacing. So I don't know what that means. I suppose you could delineate it with chalk or something that's not permanent, but then you'd have to keep doing it.
Well, and then it begs the question: if you have a physical barrier, is something which is portable, which is a rope or something, you know, or strung through a piece of PVC pipe and a concrete weighted foot, for example. I'm just trying to think. One is, I think council really wanted to try and be nimble and help these businesses quickly expand their capacity. And if they have to go out and buy, you know, wood fencing and actually attach it to the sidewalk, you know, by, you know, bolting it to there, that gets to be expensive, and also it's going to be potentially affecting the quality of the pavement as well too. So I guess it goes back to Mark. Is that right, Mark? You're going to have to advise on that.
I mean, you know, you can delineate it with cones and a line too, as you know. But again, it's not a very solid delineation. And I mean, I think if you're doing a line on the ground, and makes it very easy for people to walk out of that area or stand out of the area. You know, a physical barrier certainly would, you know, make that line more significant.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for staff on this one? Hearing none, and entertain some direction, motion.
I'm happy to make a motion on this one. I'd like to do it in two parts, actually, because I think I'd like to address the barrier as well, but I think that might be a different discussion, so I'll do that after the main part, okay? So let me give this a try. I'd move to adopt options 1A through E to additionally institute temporary waivers on D and E for this season, and additionally also to temporarily waive the provision limiting each sidewalk cafe to one segment.
Nicely done. I'll second it.
All right. Moved and second. Garden seconded. Discussion.
I just have a quick clarification, and maybe I broke up a little bit, so maybe I missed something, David. The 1C, temporarily waiving the extension of the frontage, I would actually be in favor of doing that permanently, similar to E, but I don't know if you said that already.
Give me a sec here.
Sure.
I thought that's what E did.
Well, that's what I just wasn't quite sure, so I just wanted to make.
Yeah, it looked like to me that E does permanently what C does temporarily.
I think it's D that doesn't have a temporary waiver. And so we want to make sure that while we're preparing the ordinance, this season would also temporarily waive the barrier requirement.
Yes, so my intent was to temporary and prepare the ordinance as well for both of those.
So let me clarify. Now, what Rachel just said is not what we're actually allowed to do, right? We can't waive the barrier requirement.
Yes, we can. We'll take that up separately. We can waive the barrier requirement. We can't waive
the delineation.
The requirement that there be a delineated.
Okay.
Everyone understand the motion?
So does this solve, I just want to make sure I understand. This solves the contiguous issue as well as the extending the frontage, correct?
My motion does temporarily. I'm following Brian's recommendation that this would be a good way to just try it this year to not require each sidewalk cafe to have at most one segment. They can have two segments, for instance, separated by an entrance under my motion. Temporarily.
So, David, could you highlight for me which things are the permanent aspects and which are the temporary? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
The only permanent aspects were D and E.
So in essence, you're moving option 1A through E, plus temporarily waiving the enforcement of those two while the ordinance is being prepared. Is that correct, David?
Correct. Plus temporarily waiving the contiguousness requirement.
And what was the item you were going to deal with next? Just real.
It was about the barriers.
Delineation.
Sure. For alcohol service. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is just non-alcohol service we're talking about now. Okay.
Well, I mean, this applies to places that serve alcohol, but it's not about the barriers.
Right.
I see.
Everyone clear on the motion before we vote? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carries 6-0. All right, David.
So the second motion would be to temporarily waive the requirement that a barrier at least 42 inches be constructed in order to satisfy the state requirement of delineated premises.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Martin, Garten seconded. Go ahead.
So this leaves open interpretation about how you can accomplish this. You're no longer required to put up a 42-inch barrier. Of course, you have to satisfy the state law somehow, but it doesn't say how anymore. And I think that will really make it a lot easier for people to set up things and experiment with this in a way that they haven't been able to before.
And was this, I'm sorry, did you say temporarily or permanently?
I said temporarily.
So it sounded like Mark wasn't sure about that delineation aspect. Mark, do you want to weigh in on that?
You know, I haven't read, I don't know if this is in the Code of Iowa or in Alcoholic Beverages Administrative Rules. I haven't looked at that. So I guess if you're going to do this, I would suggest that the language of the motion be fuzzy enough so that, like, if we discover we really can't do that we don't have to, because I'm going to have to take a close look at this. I've been sitting here trying to pull it up on my phone while we're talking, and I haven't found it yet. But I would feel more comfortable looking at that before, before there was a final decision. So if the motion just allowed that, assuming a state law allows it or something like that. So.
Or subject to the city attorney's concurrence or finding that it's allowed by state law or something like that.
That's good. Do you need an amendment along those lines? Or can
I
we
would.
take that as
Yep.
understood? I mean, I don't think we would make a motion to do something that's illegal, but we can amend it if you like.
Yeah, I think as long as there's an understanding that if we discover we can't do that we're not going to do it. So
that sounds good to me.
Okay.
In my understanding, the temporary nature of this is also through October 31st. Then is that the date?
Yes. And with the intention that if, we can learn from how that worked and prepare something for next season as well. It's just we're not committed to doing that now.
The legislature is not in session. They can't erode home rule in this area as well until next session. So I think we're safe for the summer.
Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. All right. Anything else regarding this item?
Well, do you want to take up the fees?
There have been no motions thus far. Is there anyone who wants to make a motion regarding that? Or if not, we'll just move on.
I'll make a motion that we waive the fees and refund the people who've already paid the $35. We would refund those for this year. It's a special
Second.
circumstance.
Moved by Garten, second by Corriere. Discussion? All right, let's go ahead and just let's do the money. Let's go ahead and do the roll call.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Anything else regarding this topic? Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate your efforts and your prompt attention to this was very, very helpful. All right, moving on to item 34, delinquent utility accounts related to COVID-19.
I'd like Deb to start if we could on this.
Yep. Hi, Deb.
Mayor and council. The item before you was impacted by the governor's public health proclamation. Through that proclamation, she disallowed utilities to be disconnected for a period of time. For the city of Ames, this involved water, electric, and sewer utilities. The proclamation expired on May 27th of 2020, so we're at a juncture of addressing how to best manage the delinquent accounts and what options we have available for our customers. We know the pandemic has affected everybody differently. We've had individuals who've had job loss, job changes, receiving temporary assistance through unemployment funds, but trying to get their feet on the ground. And so in wrapping all of those things together and looking at what options were available, our goal was to work with the customers in keeping their utilities intact while getting the delinquent accounts up to date. So there were options that we've put before you. And I will say the process that we follow is pretty much the process that's laid out to you in the council action form. We have repayment plans, which have always been available, but what's going to be a little bit different this time is if an individual had a payment plan before but didn't meet the terms of it, they can start over. There'll be a new payment plan, clean the slate, and they can move forward on working with customer service on what that plan will look like. We have CDBG COVID funds that will be available through the Planning and Housing Department to help with utilities and bring accounts up to date. We have several of the community agencies who have received or will be receiving CARES funds to help with this kind of assistance. So being able to set up our system to refer people through so that their accounts can be brought up to date and again, keep their utilities intact. That's the one thing we want to work with people individually on is getting those accounts up to date and keeping their utilities in place. So I think that's important to note as you talk through the options and the information that's before you. I know Duane Pitcher is here to address any steps in the process, and Vanessa is on the meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Questions for Deb or Duane or Vanessa this evening regarding this council action item?
I have a question for Deb, and this is primarily because we received a lot of emails right before the council meeting that seemed to believe that the city was going to cut off all utility service as of tonight or something. And I just want to reaffirm that this is a process. This is not an automatic cutting off of service, and that we are going to be doing everything possible to ensure that those utilities continue to be available. Yes?
That is correct. Well, we'll follow the process. And again, Duane can speak to specifics about that, but we have a pretty generous process to begin with with regards to notifying customers of delinquent accounts, getting several notices and opportunities to address the accounts, and whether it's a payment plan or getting assistance somewhere. But we know everybody, who's got this delinquent account has had some effect or is affected somehow by the pandemic. And so we want to work with them to get the assistance they need with their accounts and taking this step by step, but avoiding shut off if at all possible.
Do we know, it sounds like this is approximately the same number of individuals that we have had working through the process in previous years. It's just that the amounts that are owed are larger. Do we know how many people routinely end up with utilities actually getting cut off after going through this process?
I checked with that. I checked with it today. I think it's a little confusing because majority of those are ones who are in apartments, buildings, and there is a tendency for some people to just not pay the final bill and move out. And then we contact the apartment owner, usually multi-story, multiple units, and they take over because they don't want the utilities to lapse. And sometimes they get that through the deposit, get reimbursed for the deposit they have. So a lot of that it's kind of deceiving. We could have during August, maybe 50 in a month, you know what I mean? But a lot of those are from the apartment complexes.
That makes sense. And then I had one other question, and Steve, you, I think, answered part of this question. That was, we've had some community members say, well, what about Project Share, which is set up to help the members of the community who are not able to pay their winter utility bills? Is that something that can be used in this situation?
Well, I got that request for information late in the day, and I asked Mike Wheelock, who's in charge of customer service, to look into it. And his first impression is that those funds could not be used to pay for delinquent utilities related to COVID-19. That actually that Project Share program was created to meet the requirements of a state ordinance that was established back in 1988. And the wording states that the purpose of the fund is to receive contributions to assist low-income customers with winterization and to supplement energy assistance received under the federal low-income heating assistance program for payments of winter heating bills. So it seems to be it's directed in a particular area.
But that wouldn't preclude us necessarily from setting up another fund that maybe operates in a similar way that citizens could contribute to if they were interested in helping their fellow Amesites.
Yeah, I don't know if we'd set up a fund, but we have accounts, donation accounts. We could certainly segregate those funds if people noted on their check that they wanted that money to be used to assist people who had delinquent accounts. We could probably set up that type of donation account. We get that for animal control operations and Parks and Rec kind of donations. So if they would designate it, we could probably set up a separate account for that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Amber.
I have a question quick for Deb, just sort of piggybacking off of Gloria's question, because I get a little nervous about us potentially collecting money for the same things that several nonprofits are already funding. And I actually had this conversation already in another meeting today because we were talking about rental and utility assistance. And I don't know if you've heard the same thing from human service agencies, Deb, but one of the things that I gathered out of this meeting I was in today is that we have a number of agencies who do have a healthy amount of funds available to provide for not just utility assistance, but other types of assistance as well. And I just wanted to know if that's what you're hearing as well.
Yeah. Yes. In fact, some of the agencies have received funding through CARES for items or for situations that they normally don't have dollars for, but because they provide maybe utility assistance or family development assistance, they've been getting CARES dollars then to provide some wraparound services.
Okay.
So there is a lot of assistance out there. Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're hearing the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, and it's maybe the case that we just need to make sure that we're letting everybody know what's out there and where that money is, and if people want to donate to some other fund that's out there, perhaps, I don't know, United Way or whoever, if we could be an information conduit, that would be great.
Yep.
Pam, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, Amber covered what I was going to cover.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question too. I just want to make sure that I'm reading this report correctly. The way I'm reading it, it says that the only way that a disconnect order will actually be issued that shuts off someone's service is if they don't respond to the first notice and they don't respond to the second notice. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can go to Duane's here, he can answer it. And then
I think actually, Dave, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I thought it might be helpful for those who may not have read through the staff report, for someone just to kind of quickly run through the process, because I think that would give people a great assurance that the city is not out, like you said, Gloria, to come out and cut the lines tomorrow morning. It's more or less there's a pretty long process. So Duane, can you walk through that and help people understand how much forbearance there is and how we try and work with each customer who has needs?
Yes. And I would want to mention something. One of the changes we're asking for is that because the time has passed, and I think Councilmember Betcher, drove this point home. We're not starting the process as though they've been delinquent for all this time. We're going to give people notice as though this was the first time they've showed up as delinquent. So, for all intents and purposes, we'd be wiping the slate clean. And, since we expect a lot of people coming in making payment arrangements, we're going to do these by cycle. And we go through billing cycles, so you can, assume there's about a fourth of the people per week. And as those come up that are delinquent, they'll get that 12-day notice, even though they may be, 60 days past due already. So they'll get the 12-day notice, and then at the end of that 12 days, and that asks them to come in, make arrangements, provides all the information on the various nonprofits that also provide assistance. And of course, we'll have a new one here with CDBG. And then the second notice is an on-premise, and that's a door hanger. And you're correct. The only way that they would be shut off is if they did not contact us to make some arrangements for payment,
or come in and make the payment. So there isn't, going to be, this is going to be a fairly long process as we go through these, because we do expect to make the arrangements. But we'll go through the entire process as though they had just gone delinquent as their bill comes up.
Yeah, I think just to point out in the council action form, it also mentions that when someone comes in to try to make some arrangements, there are referrals to MICA, cities, renters and homeowner relief programs, CDBG, or other sources of assistance that are provided. So we are trying to help point them to where they might be able to get some assistance in addition to a payment plan. Is that correct, Duane?
Yes, that's correct. And then we'll have one other option now with the CDBG plan, providing some assistance also.
And I'll just throw out too, from my experience with a few of our clients that we serve, several of the agencies who normally provide assistance have really streamlined their processes and are requiring less paperwork than they normally would to help move the assistance through as quickly as possible.
Any other questions for Tim? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah. So, given the number of people who are impacted, it seems like we should have an expectation as a council to hear how things are going. It would be sort of bad if we, 6 months from now, got an update that there was a different impact than we anticipated. Is there a way in which the current alternatives don't provide any kind of direction on reporting, but could you give us any suggestions for how we could build in a reporting mechanism that would keep the council meaningfully updated on the progress of this?
Well, I think the key would be to wait till we get through all the cycles. I think there's a reasonable chance that a number of these are going to just come in and pay. That would kind of be our regular course of business. And then once we get through all the cycles and we've, either seen the people to come in and make arrangements or those that have paid, we can report back to council and let you know how it went. It could be that a fairly large number of these get caught up, and that's the real key to have people not getting further behind. That's what we want to get started on this, and so they can get out, get the assistance, get the arrangement made while it's not a real onerous amount. But it will take us a month to get through those.
So you want an update, Tim, maybe in the month of August, if that's okay, where we're at?
That sounds like a reasonable time frame to give the program a chance to work, so that maybe whoever's making that motion can include a reporting provision. The second question I had, maybe Duane, if you could clarify, and I apologize, I don't know the answer to this. If someone goes into a collection situation, excuse me, will this adversely impact their credit at some point? What's the mechanism for this impacting their future credit?
We typically do not report. They may have an arrangement through their landlord with a leave-on requirement that it runs to them, and it might get reported that way. There have been some cases, and not often on residential accounts, where we might get a judgment. Of course, that would show up on a credit search. But typically, we're not going through the effort of reporting, small amounts of leftover utility amounts. Maybe the deposit didn't cover it all. You can imagine all the accounts that move through here. We don't want to put a $50 credit knock on somebody who just graduated from Iowa State.
That's helpful. Thank you.
David, do you have a question or a comment you want to make?
Yeah, just going back to the way I phrased it at first, it really sounds to me like the actual cutoffs, they're tied closely to not inability to pay, but just non-responsiveness, right? If you can't get to talk to the person at all, then yeah, there's still going to ultimately, after this process, there will be a risk of cutoff. But as long as someone actually responds to one of these notices, then the city will work with them, right, and figure it out. Isn't that true?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's critical for people to understand. Thanks.
Any other questions for staff before we open it up for public comment?
Yeah, I have one. So my question is about the timeline. Based on the staff report, I could see that the delinquency processing, maybe the first of the 4 weeks would start immediately, but there's a deadline on the LIHEAP program of June 30th. And then if our CDBG funds aren't available yet, could you speak a little bit about how the funding opportunities are going to be available for the delinquency processing?
Vanessa, could you answer that one on the block grant?
Certainly. I did get some notification from HUD today. I just wanted to make sure that we could proceed prior to receiving approval of our action plan, because I didn't want to incur costs and not be able to get reimbursed for them. So they did respond in writing that we can proceed and be eligible for reimbursement. That is very helpful. And so once I complete the environmental review process, which will be done in the morning, we can look at hopefully getting applications out a lot sooner, because it says it'll probably take them 1 more week before they get through everything that we need. So one thing that's important for this program is people cannot have been disconnected in order for, it has to be preventive. So cycling people through who are at that point of getting a disconnection notice, we could probably help them a lot swifter than if they've already been disconnected. We wouldn't be able to help them through this process.
Thank you. Gloria, I know you had to change over into a different form of media. Are you able to hear us and also respond?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Any other questions for staff before we move on to public comment? All right, we'll open up the public input on this topic. Is there anyone, Brian, who wants to address council on this item this evening?
Yes, Mayor, I see a hand raised from Terry Potter. Terry, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can begin your comments.
Hi, Terry. Would you also introduce yourself and your address, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Terry Potter, 608 Douglas Avenue. I think this discussion has been very helpful this evening, particularly to myself. I would just ask that the council take into account the exploding number of COVID-19 cases in Story County, and I'm sure the effect of that on the excuse me, the city of Ames. In considering the various alternatives. One alternative that would seem to make sense, especially in light of Vanessa's comments earlier, would be that if necessary and if to prevent as much as possible people from being cut off, even though I know there's a long process, is that to have some process whereby some of that CBDG money could be used, even without application by the individual to prevent cutoff of service. Again, particularly in light of the, we've gone from 100 cases at the beginning of, or less than 100 cases at the beginning of June to, close to 500 cases now of COVID-19 in the Story County. So just wanted to add that to your discussion. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else, Brian?
Mayor, I do not see anyone else with their hand raised.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and close public input. Council?
I would go ahead and move alternative 1 and add, I guess, a D under C for staff to report back to us in August.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved by Corriere, seconded by Garten. Discussion? Hearing none. Go ahead and do a roll call, Amy.
Yes, sir. Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Aye.
Betha.
Aye.
Barton.
Aye.
Junk.
Nay.
Corey.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carried. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Duane, for your participation and help this evening. Move on to item 35, staff report regarding small lots and increasing the diversity of housing types. And just as a matter of point of order here, this is a staff report, and anticipating that this is the beginning of a potentially a council desires ongoing conversation. We'll not take public input this evening, because this is just a starting point. And if it's going to go any further, I anticipate we'll probably go into in the future work session, and then maybe other information that council is looking for from staff that would be germane to the conversation. And we did get at least one excellent response this afternoon, kind of laying out some thoughts that was helpful for council. So I think, Kelly, you're going to take it over from here? You know, unmute yourself, Kelly.
Yeah, if I could get screen share started, then I can put up the PowerPoint. While I'm waiting for that, as you noted, this report is really a product of your goal setting from January. You specifically asked us to look at small lots in an effort to expand housing opportunities in the city. The first task related to that goal was to give you a background report. The staff report really identified how to look at small lots as a component of the development process, and to give you some examples of how other cities look at it. And then we did provide you a PowerPoint in advance of tonight that was meant to help illustrate some of those concepts and give you some examples of things that we see from some of the research that we did too. So here we go. I have my controls up. So. All right, are we seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
All right, so I'll come back to the staff report when we get to the options, but to quickly help familiarize you with what we're talking about, this is a housing issue that I think has been under discussion in many jurisdictions in many states across the country. It's an industry issue and it's a city issue. I think we're looking at it as how to provide more diversity of housing within the market, and also to look at how maybe more affordable housing options are also delivered again by the market itself. So a lot of different entities have addressed this issue and have approached it from different perspectives. This is a table that was in the staff report. I'll come back to that. But what we're really talking about isn't necessarily a small or a tiny house. Sometimes people ask us, where can I build a tiny house in the city? And tiny houses are usually a couple hundred square feet. They're most often on a mobile trailer kind of chassis, and they're not really a stick built or a pre-manufactured home that's on a foundation. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're really talking about is creating individual lots for long-term construction of homes. And a normal lot in the city of Ames is probably a double car wide garage kind of lot's going to be in that 65-foot wide range. And they're typically going to be about 120 feet deep. So you're talking in that 8,000 square foot range. But a lot of lots in Ames are well over 10,000 square feet for new construction. And if you're going to have a 3-car garage, then you're looking at a lot that's probably 80 feet in width. So when we start to talk about small lot, it's not just the area, but it's the width that's most important. And you'll see from some of these examples that the floor plans have to be really precise and specific to make sense for the home buyer, and then also to provide features on the lot and architecturally that would make sense for a neighborhood. So we're really looking at lots that are going to be under 50 feet wide and most of the time under 100 feet deep. So here's an example of one source, the National Home Builders Association, describing how they look at small lots in their marketing and in their discussion with their members. Here's an example that we pulled out from the Urban Land Institute, where they did some case studies. And I think this is just a really nice little package here of kind of explaining the whole thing that we're talking about. The picture on the left represents the architecture. You can see even though it's not a high-priced home, It does have a lot of features that add character to the home. You can see by the picture how close it is nestled in against the other homes. So side yards are not a big feature of this. That is how we're cutting out a lot of the space. It has an approachable front yard set on a foundation. In this case, it's a rear loaded home. And then you can start to see how the floor plans work on the first and second floor. This one may or may not have a basement. It kind of depends on where you're building these, how these are done. And then you start to see how the lot layout works. And then on the far right, you can see that pattern of the neighborhood. And you can see how they start to get closely spaced together. And really what you're looking at is a more narrow floor plan rather than a ranch style that's more sprawling across the width of a lot. Another idea here from the Land Institute is, again, their definitions of kind of more on the square footage of the homes. They're looking here more at what the size of the unit is, of less than 1,400, less than 1,800. But we've seen people approach these smaller lots and still build 2,000 square foot plus homes. So one point we made in the staff report is don't confuse the small lot with necessarily a small home or necessarily a lower cost, because depending on the builder's goals, they could build on a small lot and still have a large home, or have a very featured packed home that is still going to be expensive. And cities have approached this concept differently. I think the concerns that cities are trying to address is the long-term livability. I think they want to see housing built, give options to buyers, but what's the long-term success of a neighborhood? How do we have green space that's still there? How do you address privacy? How do you address parking? How do you address visitors to the site? What's the accessibility into a home? What's the appearance of all of these things? So long-term, there's value in the neighborhood that reaches other community goals. So cities will approach these regulations in a different manner. There's case-by-case reviews through planned unit developments. In this case, what you're seeing is something that's called a pattern book, where a city went through the effort of kind of defining different types of homes and explaining how they could fit on lots. So it's a little more predictable about matching up the pattern with the lot types and not having to do a case-by-case review. Another approach to doing that same thing is a form-based code. We've talked once in a while about how those work, but really what a form-based code does is define in great detail the building envelope and cares much less about the use within it. So it's a lot like the pattern book in that it's defining the style or the placement of a structure, and less so about density and less so about exactly how the use occurs in those homes. Iowa City is looking and has done a couple of different small lot options. So when Eloise was researching this, she did find these diagrams to kind of illustrate one of their concepts of doing what they're calling cottage homes. And again, you can see how the patterns work, where the homes are brought to the front. Garages could be detached. They could be a side loading garage too on a corner lot, just to give you that sense of relationship between 1 and 2 story homes, and where you can still have private space on one of these lots. This is a little bit different example where you're not on individual lots. This is where you're looking at centering homes around green space. In this case, you can see it labeled as common area. These could be called cottages or courtyard homes. One term that we've talked about in the past is maybe a pocket neighborhood, where not all of the homes are fronting on a public street or a private street, but you're collecting them or clustering them around green space. And you can see here how the parking is really removed from the home, so it's more surface or detached garage parking, and then the homes are more about a community space than they are about the individual garage access. So within Ames, that we don't have a lot of examples of these types of smaller lots recently, and what you see here is a project that you approved in 2019. It's the West Ames. It's in Sunset Ridge. And it's under construction still, so it's not fully complete. But just to give you a sense of what we have seen, and you can go out and experience this small development if you want. It's only 15 homes, but it is a toe in the water kind of approach to the market to see how the market receives these in the city. And you can see what we're talking about is here's lot sizes around 4,000 square feet. They had a typical lot that was about 43 feet. It was a mix of rear access off of a private street and kind of the front door facing either a public street or common space. I put this example we referenced this in the staff report. This is a little bit older. This is from like 2006, and I'm not sure why it says Lakeside Drive on there. It's really Brickman is the street name here. I think this picture really helps explain the context. The homes here along Lakeside are the small lot homes. And what you have in the rear yard is your very conventional 10 and 11,000 square foot standard homes. And you can just kind of see the relationship, how you have much more space in side yards, how much more yard space there is versus the small homes. So it's a really good juxtaposition of the two types of products and how they start to look differently. Here on Brickman or Lakeside, as it's shown, this is a private street. They did have enough space for individual driveways. Around the corner, you can see some individual visitor parking built into the system. When they do private streets, they often don't meet width requirements that we would expect for parking on a street. So we try to find visitor parking solutions that are off street as well. So those are really kind of contextual examples to the question. And when City Council put this out as a goal, I think there's a lot to discuss tonight on where you're trying to go with variability or mix of products or affordability for staff to really understand what the priorities are to look at things in this context of different homes. And as we mentioned in our staff comments, there's no pressure here to move forward with a specific option tonight. As you're looking at this, maybe you'll have new ideas, more questions, and you can easily direct staff to bring back more research or more examples that might be helpful before you have direction on where to move with this. I'm going to go back to the staff report now, so hold on for a second here.
Kelly, can you stay on that just 1 second? I have a minor question.
Yep.
From your vantage point, in terms of housing developments that are more likely to create connectedness in community, one question I have is where you have a garage prominent structure. Is there research, or do you have a sense of the impact of what the neighborhood is like if you're all you're seeing is garages? And we have a number of those in Ames. And I like the first pictures you saw. I'm curious what other people thought, but I like it where the garage is in the rear, and you're more likely, I think, to have interaction with neighbors. Do you have any general thoughts? I don't want to take us off task, but the disparity in those is sort of interesting. Do you have a quick comment on that?
Yeah, I think from my experience in my last positions, we did mostly smaller homes, infill projects, and townhomes. So we spent a lot of time trying to balance the public street appearance, the private space for that homeowner. What can they enjoy on the site? What are they getting for, maybe they don't need a yard, but they're getting some kind of outdoor patio space. And then what's the common amenity that gives some identity to this little project? So the idea that it's just garages on a private street, no yards, drive into a dead-end cul-de-sac and drive out, that is not something that your staff here in Ames is going to promote as a housing solution. So if we do end up with front-loaded homes, I still think you want to look at what's the sidewalk connectivity, what's the open space connections that would go along with it. And I think in general, we agree that having a front presence to the home is definitely desirable. From a SEPTED or a community policing perspective, having visible front doors, having eyes on the street is always valuable. So we don't want to lose track of that either, just because a lot's narrow and somebody wants to get the garage in first and then have no visibility to a front door. So there's a lot of choices out there, but I think there's some that'll bubble up that'll be priorities as we look at different rules or at least expectations.
Thank you.
Yep. So as we mentioned, even though this is a common issue to talk about, especially at planning conferences or builder or housing conferences, a lot of cities don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So when we looked around at different cities in Iowa, I would say your default basic single-family zoning is the same in almost every city. We actually have one of the smaller lot sizes and one of the higher density expectations at 6,000 square feet. What cities are doing normally is rely on a PUD process. So they're asking for developers to ask for waivers or deviations from basic code standards to do small lots. With that said, Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, there are two that have some of the smaller zoning district numbers up here in a low density kind of configuration. They've recently changed code. That's why you can see a little bit more aggressive stances on how to fit additional units in. If you're looking at someone that has a 10-year-old zoning code or more like us, It's very rare to find allowances for these smaller lots and have a predictable system. And again, for 20, 30 years, people have relied on planned unit developments to be the solution. And I would say that's most often the case because each project's a little bit different. Developers have different priorities, and they are often dealing with different site sizes. So sometimes a PUD is the best option, even if it is additional process. All right, I lost track here of my stop share. So within the staff report, we presented options for the city council to think about as we move forward with this. There are some very short and simple options that you could do if we were just looking at creating a very predictable but slightly more variability. Options 1 and 2 talk about just lowering our lot size standards or adding in an element of where some variation it can be sprinkled in. It doesn't really address creating a planned community. What it lets a developer do is kind of expect to follow a public street system and follow normal lotting patterns, but have some possibility of doing slightly smaller lots when it fit into the design that they're looking for. So those are pretty straightforward, pretty simple options. They don't go very far in terms of creating substantially different neighborhoods than what we see today. Option 3 is a little different in that we're talking about if our goal is to really encourage and support housing variety, the city council could take a perspective that we need more lot variability. Right now, we just rely on density. We don't really expect a variation of lot sizes, so they could be 100% the same, or they could be a lot different with some smaller 6,000 square foot lots and some larger to make it all average out. In option 3, it would be an expectation in our code of some percentage of variability to be added in. You don't see this very often. Sometimes you do. It kind of depends on why the standards are being created and what goals the city council is trying to address. Option 4 is that planned unit development tool that I mentioned that many cities use. The big difference here from our planned residence district, and this was noted by one of the developers today, that the way the FPRD works is it's based on the idea of open space as the primary reason for using that tool. If we're talking about producing additional housing, it's intentional that we're losing open space. We're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to create more housing in the same amount of space. So we could add a new planned unit development tool, which would be new to us, but not really new to many jurisdictions, that would focus more on the housing plans and the housing layout and less on the green space and the open space expectations. So it can either be complementary to the PRD, or in theory, it could replace a PRD. The way we set this up, it would be complementary, and it would be a different option for the city on looking at how to do smaller homes and more efficient layouts.
Don, is it okay if I ask one question on this?
Yep.
So what you said, I need some help with this. So it seems counterintuitive that option 4 would necessarily diminish focus on green space. Why would that be with option 4?
I would say, I think one of those bad raps that zoning gets is the standards, the default standards are kind of hard to achieve if you want to do anything with variation. So a PRD allows for flexibility, but its automatic trade-off is substantial open space being set aside. And it has no density expectation necessarily. I think if you were to approach the small lot from the perspective is that we're trying to increase housing, trying to get slightly higher density, then there would not be a default mandatory 40% open space requirement. That's really hard to achieve if you don't already have some large amount of land you need to set aside for an environmental purpose. To just set aside 40% of land, that's not going to motivate a developer to do a small lot project.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Then option 5, and we're just trying to cover kind of the whole gamut here. There's a lot of ways you can go in terms of direction or more research that if depending on what your interests are. But option 5 is again trying to add elements of predictability here, using best practices to define housing types. We can do this through either creating versions of prototypes, meaning that if you have a lot of a certain type, these are the types of homes that would fit well in that situation. Form-based zoning kind of again describes how we would want to orient a home, how different features need to be integrated based on lot sizes. This would be more design-oriented, and it might need to be combined with some of these other tools. As a standalone tool, since we don't use form-based zoning right now, it might be a steep learning curve. It could be a good basis for design guidelines that help you operate within a planned unit development or some other tool where you're responding to a developer specific request. In our comments, I think, again, we believe that we should take this on and find some option here to add more variability. We've been talking for years about how do we get more housing built in the city. It's very clear that it's a desire in the community. In the Ames Plan 2040 process, we've heard it from council, we've heard it from the public, we've heard it from the developers. The hard part's always been what can we do to do that within the market-based system. And I think that even if we just did a small adjustment to go down to 5,000 square feet, I think that would encourage it. I think going into another option that creates the idea of making these more planned communities with smaller lots would very much be beneficial as well. So staff is eager to take direction from council and find out where we should go with this and how to move forward. In terms of public input, because this is the first step out here and we're just responding to task 1 from the council, our public input was to make an effort to reach out to our developer interest group that we maintain an email notification list for, and just alert them that city council was taking this first step as a staff report. There wasn't really a way to other than let them know this is coming, there wasn't really specific options for them to weigh in on or to kind of understand where we're going at this point. I'm sure if we move forward that there will be definitely more developer outreach to understand what their priorities are and how this would work within that system. That's what I have to present. I'm trying to give you some context and some options, and really I need to hear a discussion by the council to do any more with this topic.
Just one more piece of feedback. I think the form-based zoning is pretty new for the development community, and it's new for us. If I don't know, maybe if you're going to have something in the web for people to respond to, if you could provide some substantial examples of how form-based zoning would work, that would be very helpful.
So, council, I'd like to start off by asking a philosophical question. On the very first page, top of the page, under background, it says one of the city council's goals this year is to increase the stock of diverse housing types for a variety of income levels through zoning. And later on that same page, and the top of the second page, staff makes it pretty clear that, I'm quoting, while lot area influences overall cost of housing, it should not be misconstrued that smaller lots necessarily lead to lower cost or affordable homes automatically. Variables in home size and finishes affect the overall cost of a home at a much higher rate than lot size. Staff finds the issues of sales price and lot area do intersect, but it's more directly connected to creating housing variety than ensuring affordable housing. And so as we start talking about this, tonight, and as we move forward, I'm wondering if your goal is being accomplished or if they're incompatible goals. In other words, if the goal is to provide housing for a variety of income levels, is it through zoning or is it through some other means, essentially? So I think it's to try and tease out what are we trying to accomplish with this specific goal. I think it would be helpful. I think it would be helpful for staff as well.
John, real quick.
Kelly, I welcome your input on that one too, or comment on that. I'm just trying to trying to help us drill down and tease out what we're trying to accomplish. So that I think will help moving forward in the months ahead as we talk about this further.
John, I don't think that we can achieve affordable housing through zoning. When you look at the factors that go into the cost of housing, the materials, the labor, the lot cost, you can tweak some things with zoning, but to really drive down the price, I think the only thing that we can really do is to encourage more construction so that that the price is being affected by the quantity. The challenge we're having is that we're just not building enough houses to drive down the curve.
But I think that if you allow for smaller lot sizes, you can definitely put more houses where before you could only put fewer houses. And so I understand what you mean to say that it's not only zoning changes that are going to bring us affordable housing, but I still think it's an important piece of that, I guess.
I don't disagree, Brahman. I do think that, I'm very supportive of creating some flexibility, but I just want to make sure, I think John's question is very profound. This is not going to be the silver bullet that solves all of our affordable housing issues just by tweaking the lot sizes.
I agree, but there is no silver bullet. I think it's many approaches at once, and this is one of them.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think we've heard from the development community too, that this type of flexibility, whether it's with the PUD or with some other mechanisms, will help in one way to address some of the affordability issues.
So I guess, again, back to our goal, increase the stock of diverse housing types for a variety of income levels. If we define the variety of income levels, is that essentially people from LMI up to a much higher wage earner, or is it just saying it's a much narrower band, or is it one of those, we want to increase the stock of diverse housing types through zoning? And I'm just trying to make sure we understand what we're trying to accomplish and be true to our goals, because that will help, again, help staff and make sure that we're hitting our goals essentially.
John, I would just say that I feel like we are getting into that position where we are using the term affordable housing, and we should really be using the term housing affordability, because I think that having smaller lots can lead to housing affordability for certain income levels much more than it leads to affordable housing for LMI individuals, although it can help to contribute to that. And so, when I think about this, I'm thinking about this as a means to increase the diversity of housing stock that is still going to get at more levels of income than our current housing stock does. And therefore, it's increasing affordability, but it is not specifically designed to result in solving our affordable housing problem.
I basically agree with what's been said, and that the way it's phrased, I think the way the goal is phrased is actually pretty good. It says increase the stock of diverse housing types. That's mainly what it does. And it does it for a variety of income levels. It doesn't say it does it exclusively on the housing affordability side. So I'm pretty comfortable philosophically with where this is going. I would say also that I think just considered in terms of character and usefulness of having diverse housing types in Ames, opening up more possibilities like this just makes it a better place. So I really would like to pursue this more. I'm not sure how I feel about making initial decisions on this topic right now. I feel like this was an excellent introduction presentation for me to sort of get a sense of what we're talking about. And, think about what to do next. But I think that it's worth drawing in more people to the conversation before we make any profound moves. I like some of the options presented. I think that there could be, a good role for a PUD, but I don't think we have to move quickly on this.
Other feedback or comments? Rachel?
This was one of the goals that I brought up at goal setting, so I'm really excited to see this report. And one of the other things that I was looking at was kind of how our tasks are laid out below the goal. It says after this report is provided, for us to decide whether to proceed with changes before getting another staff report about accessory dwelling units. But I was thinking maybe it would be helpful to have that report on accessory dwelling units before making any decisions, so we can comprehensively look at both of them.
I agree with you, Rachel. I think that component of multiple residences on one lot and accessory dwelling units is part of this whole discussion, and I would prefer to see that before making decisions about the zoning that we see in front of us right now.
If I could offer something there, I think that would be a big change for us. I think in the Ames Plan 2040 discussion, we said that we would look at that and investigate that issue more when we had gotten through the land use discussions of understanding what expectations were in existing neighborhoods. And I really viewed this task as about the new development. I think it was really clear in Ames Plan 2040, council endorsed the idea in new development areas, allow accessory dwelling units, allow housing variety, allow everything. The question within the existing neighborhoods was definitely deferred as a conversation once we had a better understanding of what infill choices would be, how compatibility works, research that goes into ADU kind of ordinances, understanding your lot configurations and what goes into that. So to me, they're not directly related because they're not addressing the same types of properties. And I would say that's probably why the tasks were split up as two different things. They could be done concurrently maybe, but there's definitely more work in the accessory living unit side than there is in just investigating zoning district changes.
Kelly, can you just review again for us how this discussion on zoning and zoning ordinance is interfacing with Ames 2040? Because Ames 2040 is not necessarily rewriting the zoning ordinance. They're complementary and they're being adopted and cross-referenced, right?
As you get through Ames Plan 2040, it'll become clear what elements of the zoning ordinance need to change to fit the policies of that plan. I think this task one, at least, fits within the current land use policy plan. We already have a goal to support housing diversity and variety. And if we're saying our current tools aren't accomplishing that, and I would definitely echo that they're not, then that's why you could say moving ahead with a zoning ordinance change right now fits the idea of the current LUPP. It's not forecasting the Plan 2040's outcome.
So they could run in parallel then. As you're finishing up the 2040 plan, you could start looking at options after further conversation. Is that correct?
Yeah, there'll definitely be other things. I think if you move ahead with any of this stuff, it'll be very complementary to whatever happens with Ames Plan 2040 based on our conversations this spring.
Kelly, can you remind us, there were kind of two things you suggested as things staff thought were good suggestions on this: the PUD tool and the 5,000 square foot lot size. Or those were just the two you kind of?
I think if you just reduce lot area, that's pretty simple to do. I don't think there's a lot behind that. That just gives a little bit of change to the ordinance. It doesn't really lead to creating those new kind of development concepts. That's where you probably need the PUD tool to allow for a development of, let's say, 40, 50, or 60 homes. They're going to be uniquely designed to fit in a development. That's where you need that tool.
So the two of them in concert, though, are a pretty good combo in terms of.
Yeah, I think you could even choose. I mean, as you look through that, you'll start to understand what we want or expect from a small lot project, and then maybe some of that can be rolled into zoning directly, and then maybe some of that needs to be kept in the PUD ordinance. And maybe you do both. Maybe you only do one or the other after you go through that evaluation.
Ready for?
I wouldn't say don't look at the accessory living unit conversations we had. That was expected to be standard based. You wouldn't have a homeowner come in and say, I want a PUD label, and have council making these individual decisions on the merits of one request. So that's why I would say there's a lot more effort that goes into the accessory living unit. And that's really based on us looking at other cities that have gone after this. This is not something that happens quickly. Yeah, so that's why we really saw it as two kind of different tasks.
So Kelly, back to your comment, and it was actually at the end of your staff report. Really, the people this is going to affect the most, that is developers, were alerted to the fact that we were going to be taking this up, but they didn't really have any hard copy of anything to really look at. And as a staff report, we weren't taking public input. We did get one, feedback, but I'm sure there's others we would get. Would it seem appropriate to schedule a workshop to talk about this, or some kind of a feedback loop? Because I think if we're going to make changes, we want to make sure that these changes are congruent with what people are looking for, and they may have some additional ideas. Would you concur, or what thoughts do you have on that?
I mean, we could absolutely do that. I think it's just always hard for the development community to respond in theory. So without some idea where council's generally interested in heading with the project, because there's a big difference between option 1 and option 5. And we can review those really broad options with them. That's possible. I just don't. And you might hear feedback about what their priorities are. And then maybe there's an option that we can explain how that would fit those priorities best. But then they're still not reacting really to what council's trying to accomplish. If we have a little more direction, I think it's easier for the development community to respond to some more specifics.
Are we ready to try a motion, or?
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I would move that we have staff look into further and reach out and get feedback on options 1 and 4. And option 1, again, kind of as Kelly stated, so that 5,000 square foot lot size, and then also the PUD, looking into a PUD tool.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion.
So does the PUD tool create a lot more work for staff than option 5 with the form-based zoning standards?
I think 5 is more work than 4. Because 5 is really going to get to a higher level of detail than 4. 4 is going to set up a framework or parameters that what we want to see. It would respond to a developer's request, versus 5 is going to define in a greater level of detail what we would expect someone to do. And the developer knows going into that they need to match that expectation.
But doesn't that remove more of the project by project analysis if you've got the design standard set? Yeah, for form-based zoning. I mean, I know of a lot of places that use form-based zoning. I also know of a lot of places that use PUDs.
Yeah, I think form-based zoning while it has value and it definitely has qualities to it, it is time intensive on both the front end and on the back end. So if you're really interested in that level of detail, it's definitely a time investment up front and ongoing with each project.
Thanks.
And I guess the reason I'm moving these is because I'm leaning heavily on staff's recommendation. You know, they brought us this report. It's a topic that Kelly is much more familiar with. So if those two sound like a good set that we could at least start with and research more and ask for input from the development community, I mean, that's all tied into. It seemed like that was a good start for me.
So what if feedback comes back that that developers really see option 2 as being beneficial? Absent that being part of the motion, I'm not saying it is, Brown. I'm just trying to tease out.
I guess, option 2, that would optional, that would be part of the PUD tool, wouldn't it?
Option 2 is really meant to be one of those base zoning things that someone could just propose. They won't need to go through a zoning process like a PUD.
Sure.
Yeah,
I guess I'm trying to sort of simplify what we're asking staff to do.
Okay. So the process that you would envision as part of the motion would be staff would go out with option 1 and 4 and solicit feedback from the development community. If I'm just being crazy, if they just come back and just say it's not just no, it's absolutely no. We think there should be a different approach. When that comes back to council, then council can consider that input that staff has gotten. But at least Kelly is taking out to the development community this initial foray that council wants some feedback on based on the goals that are being established and what staff is suggesting may be some viable options. Is that correct? That's the process we're looking at, Brown?
Yeah. If we got a really resounding result through feedback, I would be happy to listen to that too.
Yeah, okay. So this isn't a decision, it's 1 and 4, figure it out. It's basically, and get them to agree. It's just one of those 1 and 4, let's verify this is really going to be beneficial and provide more tools in the toolbox for the developers to try and accomplish the city council's goals.
Yeah.
And so to that end, going off of John's point, I like the 1 and 4, but it would be helpful, I think, if it's not too much additional work for staff to add 2 into the mix just to give some options to respond to.
For an outreach, there's no additional work for doing that. I think it's easy to kind of explain. There's 2 different ideas here. There's one that's kind of embedded in the base zoning, that kind of by right idea. And then the PUD is the more discretionary, more detailed, more comprehensive approach. So it kind of gives them 2 completely different ways of looking at their projects.
Ron, would you be amenable to a friendly amendment to add option 2 into the mix?
Can we vote on it separately?
Sure.
All right. Any other questions or discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I have one other question for Kelly, and that is, how did we arrive in option 1 at the maintaining of the 50-foot lot width requirement? It seems like the other cities that have gone to that 5,000 square foot lot have also reduced the lot width.
So that's why lot area is not that significant. If you keep lot width, a normal public street and a 50-foot lot width, you'll get the features on a public street you're expecting. You'll get driveway spacing that allows for on-street parking. You'll still have space for street trees when you factor in fire hydrants, utilities, street lights, all of that stuff. When you start to go below 50 feet, then you start to put a lot of pressure on how everything's going to fit. And that's when you start to ask the questions. Let's look at Iowa City, for example. It had 45 feet listed. They're probably doing rear-loaded homes. When you go below 50 feet, it gets to be a struggle for front-loaded garage and driveways. So that's why my comfort level on option 1 was to reduce the square footage, but keep the lot width the same. And as we go through this, maybe we'll decide that 45 is workable. But I couldn't tell you tonight that it was for a front-loaded unit. If they're rear-loaded, I'm fine with any number that we want. It's the front-loaded garage issue that gets to be concerning on public streets.
So part of your discussion with developers is figuring this out, though. I mean, asking the question, right? I mean, it's like there's an overwhelming response saying, "Hey, we think we can make 40-foot work, and here's how it's going to happen." You're going to be receptive. Even you're just going to at least report back to council what you're hearing and the rationale behind that.
Yeah, I think so.
Any other comments on the motion on the floor? Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Tim, did you want to add anything else to it tonight or not?
Sure. I mean, just because we're in a stage where we're trying to gather information, I think having more options rather than fewer would be valuable. And this is the point you raised. And so just having option 2 as a complement to option 1, I think would be helpful for gathering feedback. So I would move that we would include option 2 in what we're presenting to the community and for the workshop.
Second.
All right, seconded by Betcher. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Carried. Tim, you mentioned workshop. Kelly, I don't know. Are we talking about going out and getting feedback, staff getting feedback, reporting back, and then we determine if the workshop's necessary or not?
I think so, because when you look at your schedule for workshops, this is not on a schedule for workshops. You have in July right now, you're supposed to discuss 321 State with the surrounding neighborhood. And then in August, I think you're holding that workshop open for non-planning things. Hallelujah. And then in the fall, we're going to start talking about Ames Plan 2040 again. So I would say give us some time this summer to reach out to developers. Again, with COVID, it's not easy necessarily to get groups together. So we'll do what we can either through individual engagement or an online engagement option, and see where we stand, and let us give you some communication back, and then you decide if you want to host a workshop or how to go about incorporating that input.
Well, regardless, we're still going to need some time where we have people have the opportunity to address council and give feedback. Hopefully earlier on in the process, the better, from a standpoint that it's not just when it's already in format, ready to go into the book, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's clearly going to be, I mean, we're not going to be ready to start drafting ordinances for quite a bit here, because we'll have input, report back to you, and then get direction on how to proceed. Then we have to develop the standards in a much higher level of detail.
Because one of our goals, again, was to improve and increase the engagement with the community, in the conversations, which I think we're all committed to. I know staff's committed to it as well. We want to make sure that we're following through on that goal, consistent with these as well, too. Yep. Any other questions for Kelly or comments for Kelly? I think it was really well done, Kelly. Thank you very much, and it's very helpful. A good jump start for our working on this goal.
Yeah, I hope we find something that works for the developers. I think we have some opportunities here.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 36, public hearing on the 2019-2020 shared use path system expansion, Med Trail. Any questions for staff on this particular item?
John, I have a question on this one. I want to direct council's attention, page 3 of the staff report. Section 9 is the duration of the easements. So normally easements are perpetual unless they're like a temporary construction type of easement, or some other reason why we would want to constrain the duration. So otherwise our utility easements, our access easements are all perpetual. And my concern is that by creating a 20-year easement, that's going to place a burden on us as a staff to periodically having to go back and supposedly renegotiate this easement, which we would hope for an amenity like this trail would go on forever. And if we needed to change, for example, there was a need to move it, we would negotiate that. But to have a 20-year sunsetting of this, I mean, it's in some ways it's already been negotiated. It's just ours to vote on tonight. But I'm very concerned that this is going to become a precedent in terms of how we enter into agreements with the university. I mean, it goes both ways. There'll be situations where they'll want easements from us, and are we going to ask for the same sort of silly 20 years? I think it's a bad precedent.
Steve, you have any comment on this one, or you're muted, Steve?
Over the years, the position of the university has changed. There was a time when we had 50-year, 199-year agreements with the university for parkland, and it's been reduced substantially. Even our agreements for easements where we place the Furman Aquatic Center was not as long as we'd like it. Certainly not as long as the life of the building, and we just experienced that's the position. I'm not even sure it's the position of the university. In the past, we make those negotiations would take place with the university administration in the city of Ames. Now we have involved the Board of Regents Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office, who have different requirements or expectations for their easements. So it's not that we didn't want longer easements and we wouldn't try to stand firm for that, but it was not possible to negotiate that right now.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? All right, declare the public hearing on the 2019, 2020 Shared Use Path System Expansion, Vet Med Trail, South 16th Street to ISU Research Park to be open. And Brian, is there anyone who wants to address council on this particular hearing?
Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you. Declare the public hearing on this item to be closed. I would entertain a motion on the resolution approving a 20-year shared use path easement with Iowa State University.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Viti Hansen, and was that Gloria?
Amber.
Amber, thank you. Discussion? Roll call?
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Thank you. And I entertain a motion on resolution approving final plans and specifications and awarding the contract to Howry Construction Incorporated of Rockwell City, Iowa, in the amount of $282,715.05, subject to the city being granted the acceptable easement from the state of Iowa.
So moved.
So moved.
Moved by Viti Hansen, seconded by Betcher. Roll call, please.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Thank you. Moving on to item 37, 2019-2020 arterial street pavement improvements, 13th Street, Wilson Avenue to Duff Avenue. Any questions for staff on this particular item? Seeing none, declare the public hearing on the 2019-2020 arterial street pavement improvements, 13th Street, Wilson Avenue to Duff Avenue to be open. Is there anybody who wishes to address council on this particular topic? Brian, is there anyone that wants to address the council?
No, Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you. Declare the public hearing on this item to be closed. Entertain a motion on resolution approving final plan specifications and awarding the contract to Construct Incorporated of Ames, Iowa, in the amount of $2,350,344.20.
Move alternative one.
Second.
Garten moved, Corriere seconded. Roll call, please.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item 38, hearing on the side ride 2020 interior improvements. Any questions of staff on this particular item? Hearing none, I declare the public hearing on Ride 2020 interior improvement project to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this item, Brian?
Mayor, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you. I declare the public hearing on this item to be closed and entertain a motion approving reported bids and delaying the award to allow for the transit board's approval.
So moved.
Carton,
Second.
Junk, seconded. Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried 6-0. Thank you. Item 39, hearing on a proposed vacation of a portion of city right-of-way adjacent to the south edge of 2400 Southeast 16th Street. Any questions for staff on this item? Seeing none, I declare the public hearing on the proposed vacation of the portion of city right-of-way adjacent to the south edge of 2400 Southeast 16th Street to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this item? Brian?
Mayor, I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Thank you. Declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on first passage of ordinance.
So moved.
Betty Hansen,
Second.
Gart, seconded. Thank you. Roll call.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere, Martin,
Aye.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten.
Aye.
Okay, moving on to item 40, first passage of ordinance revising the parking regulations on Westbrook Drive. Any questions for staff on this particular item? Seeing none, we'll open up public input on this first passage of the ordinance. Brian, is there anyone who wants to address council on this particular topic?
Mayor, I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Okay. We will close public input, entertain motion on first passage of ordinance revising parking regulations on Westbrook Drive.
Passage.
Martin moved. Gardner, you seconded?
Sure.
All right. Roll call, please.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Thank you. Entertain a motion on second passage of ordinance establishing parking restrictions on Duff Avenue from 20th Street to Grand Avenue.
So moved.
Moved on second by Junk. Is there a second?
Second.
Garten seconded. Thank you. Roll call.
Martin, Mr.
David?
Martin,
Sorry, I didn't hear what's happening.
Item 41, second passage of ordinance.
Can you roll calling?
Yes.
Aye, thank you.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 42, entertain a motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4415, updating the name of Iowa State University student government in Ames Municipal Code, section 26A.
Move on third.
Junk moved. Betty Hansen seconded. Thank you. Roll call.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to our disposition of communications. There are three items on the list. First one is memo from Planning and Housing, informational memo response to amend the AUFP long-term industrial reserve designation on the former Caramoli USA plant. I believe that it will be staff's recommendation to place this on the future agenda. That correct, Steve?
That's correct. A little more complex and different than your first request. We think we need to explain it to you at least.
Move that we add this to a future agenda.
Second.
Moved by Corriere, seconded by Betty Hansen. Any discussion? All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Second item, council, was a memo that staff prepared regarding a request from Blake Jensen on some property south of Ames this afternoon. We received, or this morning we received an email that was forwarded from the applicant, and in talking with Kelly Diekman late this afternoon, it's his understanding that they just want to withdraw that in its entirety and have no interest in pursuing it further. So we'll just not take any action, and if they want to proceed with it in the future, they'll have to go ahead and start the whole process over again. Last one is communication from Farmers Market from Gene Peterson.
Well, I'm happy to make a motion on this. I'll make a motion on this. Well, I guess for the benefit of people who are watching, the request was in observation that the governor has lifted all restrictions on farmers markets. The request is basically to permit the Ames Main Street Farmers Market to resume all activities. And this is an area that we have discretion over simply because it's a city-owned street. My own feeling is that I think we should still have an interest in minimizing entertainment distractions in town. I fully support the idea of allowing non-food items to be sold as in previous years, because that's the shopping sort of thing, and I don't think that really attracts, people hanging out for part of a morning. At least not in the numbers that we've seen in previous years with the activities and music. And similarly, I know some of the food vendors, they incidentally like to offer samples of their food and wine as simply a prelude to purchase, at least a hopeful prelude to purchase. Again, that's not really, I think, a gathering sort of event. So I'm comfortable with those two items. I would move to approve the request of addition of nonprofit artisans, crafters, and other vendors to the market, and food and wine sampling can be resumed at the market.
Second.
I'm sorry, who seconded it? Brown?
Amber, Bronwyn, one of us. Yeah.
All right, Amber.
David, could you clarify, so what would not be allowed in the farmer's market?
Correct. The other three items that were requested in the letter that we received were activities and music is one of them, and then tables and chairs being set back up in the market for people to presumably hang out and eat their food. And then the third is to be able to eat food within the market, which we haven't allowed yet. So it's really more of a get your things and, say goodbye to everyone and please socially distance at that point rather than continuing to hang out.
Yeah, I'm not really comfortable with that eating of food within the market, so I probably won't support this, but other than that, I don't see a problem with the nonprofits, artisans, etc.
It doesn't include that, Gloria.
Just in terms of
It
sampling.
doesn't include,
The one the two he moved for were just the sampling of food and wine, and then the general merchandise vendors, so to speak.
yeah, I just think it's difficult to separate the food sampling from eating other food, and it may lead people to believe that they can eat the food from the food trucks that we've already approved.
Okay. Everyone understand the motion?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to support this motion. I'm going to come back and make a motion that we add those other items, but I think at least if we can find consensus on these things, I think that's beneficial.
All right. Those in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining?
No.
Motion carried 5-1 with Betcher voting nay. All right, Dave. Tim?
Yes. So in light of the fact that the state has lifted the other restrictions on farmers markets, we have generally taken the posture that we are going to follow the state's recommendations with respect to issues of health and safety. And a point that I think David has made very well from an equal protection perspective, that we want to treat like parties in a similar fashion as restaurants have been able to reopen and they have to follow certain protocols. I think that this would be a logical next step for the farmers market. And the third aspect that I want to add is there's a great emotional benefit. And it's hard to quantify this, but I think that the farmers market provides an important sense of connectivity for our community. And so for those reasons, I would move that we would lift the other restrictions on the farmers market.
Is there a second? Hearing none, the motion dies for lack of a second. Okay, moving on to council comments. Nicole, you've been awfully quiet tonight. I will start with you tonight.
I don't have any comments.
Okay. All right. Bronwyn?
Nothing for me tonight.
Gloria?
We had a very successful NLC summer board and committee leadership summit. And I think there was some very exciting discussion around the ideas that the race equity and leadership team were sharing. And there are a lot of communities out there that are trying to work to improve their inclusion and diversity efforts. And I'm hoping that we will be able to continue our work on those and improve the situation here in Ames, because the work is never done. That's all I've got.
Thank you. David?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Rachel?
Just wanted to remind everyone about the second NAACP Zoom meeting this Thursday from 6 to 7. I thought the first one went really well, and I'm excited to see how the next few go.
Thank you. Amber?
So everyone's aware we've seen our COVID numbers spike over the last couple of weeks. And given what we're seeing with regards to public health, and now also several of our local businesses electing to close because of what's happened, I think that the council should have a formal discussion about what measures we're either taking legally or what measures we're encouraging the public to do with regards to keeping themselves and each other safe. I know that we received an email from Mark with regards to some of the emails that we've received, but what I would like to propose is that we add to the next agenda, a formal staff report laying out what legal options are available to us, especially given the recent Story County public health guidance, and what other recommendations staff may have about encouraging particular behaviors within businesses in the community.
Second.
Moved by Corriere, seconded by Betcher. Discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Carried. Anything else, Amber?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim?
Nothing.
All right. And I would echo what Rachel announced. The week and a half ago, we had a phenomenal, I thought it was a very educational session hosted by the NAACP, and thanks to city staff. In particular, the media productions helped out. Susan Guiazda I believe Brian was also helping. And the next one is this Thursday, and it will feature Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, our Commander Jeff Huff, and then also the Assistant Chief from Iowa State Police Department, and her name escapes me at this point. I apologize, but there'll be three individuals, and then Dr. Stewart will be serving as the moderator once again. So again, and for those who may be listening and or tried to get on last time, we had so many participants. We had to increase the Zoom capacity, which was done on the fly, and they got that done. So I believe that we'll have adequate capacity so people can participate via Zoom. And there are other platforms they can use to watch. And I believe it's also Brian or Susan, if you could just comment. These are being recorded and also archived, and people can access them after the fact. Is that correct? Or Susan, can you go?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are multiple ways to watch them, just as there are city council meetings. And if you go, you miss the actual live performance, you can go to the website and get it on the video archive, just like you pull up any other meeting. So on our front page at cityofames.org, there is a Channel 12 icon, and if you follow that, you'll get to the video archive.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for your help. Appreciate that very much. Okay. Next item is to go into closed session, and Mark, does council have justification to make a motion to go into closed session this evening?
Yes, we do, Mayor. The Iowa Code Section 21.51C allows the council to go into closed session to discuss matters in litigation or threatened litigation.
Okay. And Council, Mark sent out a very informative email. We're going to be going to a secure Zoom platform. It does require a password. And then for anyone who may be watching, we will go back into this Zoom platform after we go out of closed session in order to take any action on any item that is discussed during the closed session. And then we will also adjourn. So we'll go ahead and, so
we need a vote.
Need a vote. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do roll call, Amy. I'm sorry.
I move that we go into closed session.
Thank you.
Second.
Gloria, Amber moved, Gloria second. Thank you very much. That's important to have that. Roll call, please.
Betcher.
Aye.
Garten.
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Viti Hansen.
Aye.
Okay. We'll see you all in a few minutes here. Back in open session. And council, I would entertain a motion relative to what was discussed in closed session.
I would move that we approve the settlement agreement with Tim Hansen.
Second.
Moved by Bester, seconded by Beatty Hansen. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Martin,
Aye.
Funk,
Aye.
Moriarty,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Viti Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. And I would entertain a motion this evening to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
All right, we are adjourned.